third Saturday of every September. So a little bit of problem that they have is they never know when there's going to be any water, right? So what they decided to do, and it's the only boat race in the world where they actually cut the bottom of the boat out, so there's no bottom. So what they do is all the teams hold their boat and they run down the riverbed, up and down it, and obviously whoever crosses the line
and there's no prickles, Flintstone stuff.
No, nothing. It's all good. It's all good. And they do other little things as well. Like they set up little train tracks, and they got these little carts that go on them, and each person gets a shovel, right? And they use that to paddle their way through. But what's happened here before is it's actually rained, and the river's been flowing, so they've had to cancel it. So it's probably the only boat race in the world that has been cancelled because there's water flowing in the river. So it's a little bit weird. But they're also insured, right? They're insured, so that if it does rain and it's cancelled, they still get their money because it costs them quite a lot. You know, they do a lot of advertising for it. And that's the gap again, just in case you didn't see it the first time.
Extended the tour, is it?
I've driven around this road about 22 times before. Yeah. It takes 2 Stevie Wonder songs and a whole beer. Albert. He became very famous for his art, but he also went on later on to really make quite a movement for Aboriginal people with equal rights and that sort of thing. And he grew up about 130 kilometres west. Very similar to what you see painted over there. And he needed somebody to come with him and just basically do the cooking and helping him out a bit. So Albert went along with him for about 2 weeks. And that's where he got a real introduction to painting, and he started enjoying just watching what Rex was doing, sort of over his shoulder, and he'd do a bit of painting as well. And Rex Batterby saw that he had a bit of talent, so he spoke to them at the mission and said, "You got to get this guy a bit of paper and some paints and stuff, and get him on his way." So one of the priests there did sort of sort him out. But still he didn't really go anywhere, and it was a few years later, it's about 5 or 6 years later, that Rex Batterby came back again. I think it was in and later on that day his horse came back and there's no Jim. Jim was missing, so his brothers got a little worried and they jumped on their horses and they went looking for him. And when they found him, he was lying on his back there with a bit of blood coming out of his mouth and bruise and stuff, and he'd fallen off, right, and he had internal bleeding. So they lifted him up, put him onto a horse and got him back home, got him onto a cart, and they moved him about 300 miles to a little place called Halls Creek. Right now, Halls Creek, all it was just a part of the telegraph station, top part of the telegraph lines. What it was just a little station with a postman basically living in there, working on his little Morse code. Right, I'll explain the telegraph line to you later on. But he got there, and all the postmaster had was a little bit of first aid knowledge, right? And he said, "I can't help this guy." And Jim Darcy's brothers are saying, "You got to, because he's going to die otherwise." So what he did was he jumped into his little machine, right, his little Morse code machine, and he tried to get hold of a doctor down in Melbourne, and wasn't getting hold of anyone, so he directed it down to Perth, and he eventually got hold of a doctor in Perth, a guy called Haldane. And imagine this, right, it's all Morse code, right, so all you're hearing is little sounds and stuff, and they're writing things down, and this doctor and the postmaster are busy talking to each other. So the postmaster's saying, "This is what's wrong with this guy, he's got blood coming out here, he's got bruises here and all that," and the doctor's trying to assess what's going on, and he says, "Right, basically what Jim's got is internal bleeding, right, and you're going to have to operate." The postmaster's saying, "I can't operate." He says, "Yes, you can. What you got is two brothers over there, so what you need to do is get them to hold an arm and a leg each, hold them down because it's going to hurt, and get your little pocket knife, right, and you're going to have to operate. I'll tell you what to do." So via Morse code, right, they started doing this operation, which went for a couple of hours. So Jim's screaming there and trying to move, and his brothers are holding him down. But after a couple of hours, the operation's finished and it's successful, right? Jim was still breathing. And the doctor said, look, if he doesn't get medical attention, he's going to die. So what I'll do is I'll jump onto a steamer, an express steamer, which is leaving the next day, and would take 7 days to get up to a little place called Derby, right? And then he had to try and find a car and try and get to Halls Creek. So he jumped onto the steamer and off he went. So 7 days, and he got there and he jumped off it. He saw 2 vehicles in the town, right? He managed to get hold of the owner of one of them. And it was one of those old Model T Fords, right? The owner agreed. He said, yeah, I'll help you out. And I said, well, it was one of these Model T Fords, so you've got to crank this thing up in the front, right? You imagine the sort of vehicle it is, right? And they've got to drive down this road where there is no road, right? It's just used by horses and the occasional cart or something. So anyway, a couple of people jump into it and they start driving along, right? And they had about 500 kilometers to go to get to Halls Creek. So they start driving down and, always getting stuck and pushing it out and carrying on. But after about 4 days, it was 4 days, they eventually got within about 20 kilometers of Halls Creek when they ran out of fuel, right? So they had no fuel left. It's in the summer months, it's a little bit too hot to walk. So what they had to do, they pushed this car up onto its side, right? And they managed to drain out whatever fuel was left inside the tank. They ripped the bonnet off, and with a stethoscope, right, they actually funneled fuel into the carburetor somehow. I'm not sure exactly how they did it, but one's sitting on top of the engine, right, while they're driving along.
Oh yeah.
His finger on the edge of the pipe. How they did it.
Into Halls Creek. So they get there, right, and they jump out and they come running up to the post office there, the little station, and everyone comes walking up really gloomy, right, and the doctor's there and Jim's brothers, and he goes, thanks for coming, Doc, but you're a day late. Jim died yesterday. Jim died after 10 days, right? They got there on the 11th day. So yeah, not a very happy ending for Jim. But the thing is, right, these were the sort of stories that inspired a guy called John Flynn, right, who was the founder of the Royal Flying Doctors. And what he initially started doing, he used to go off with his camel right out into the desert, and he just used to visit people. Some of those stations, people wouldn't see anyone else for a year, quite easily a year. And he felt really sorry for them because he said, that the city people really need, the outbackies. They need, horses and cattle and all sorts of things, so they couldn't live without them. So, he, out of pity, started doing that, and eventually people were getting sick and dying when they didn't need to. All they needed was simple medical attention, and they could have survived. So he started setting up this. Eventually, somebody gave him a car. One day they started seeing what he was doing, setting up little hospitals and stuff. Someone gave him a car. So what he did with his car, he actually ripped the whole thing apart, right? He pulled every piece apart and sort of figured out what was what and learned exactly, basically taught himself to become a mechanic. And he just started expanding, and one day it hit him, about aeroplanes. So he started investing in planes, getting donations and stuff, and now I think the last I heard they had 41 aeroplanes that fly around it, and they help a lot.
Okay, we're up on Anzac Hill just before sunset, and this is kind of a 360 from here to Valley Springs.
Basically going back to Alias. So nice drive around.
This has a rolling hill topography you didn't see out in the western part of Australia. Warm, dry, and windy here, but not super hot for the cow, and then it's just wham. But just imagine what happens to the cow with all that mass hurtling down the road. Okay, I'm just going to come up, go quickly by that. Yeah, I take this video because in 10 or 15 years when I can't move,